call this meeting of the Onslow County Board of Education to order. Thanks everybody for coming today. We only have 2 items, and I say only 2 items, but they're lengthy and they're very important. The road widening for Richlands Elementary and of course our budget proposal. So we'll get started. Before Steve takes over to do this first item, just want to make sure, I know that most of you probably checked your email and you saw some questions that Bob had submitted, and they were very good questions, but I want everybody to know, independently of one another, we probably asked those same questions to the superintendent's office and to Steve's office and had those responses. So I was really counting on Steve to bring that information forward because he's probably shared it with 4 or 5 people, but the questions were very good, Bob. Steve?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Members of the board, the new Richlands Elementary School, located adjacent to Steve Park in Richlands, North Carolina, requires Calhoun Road to be widened for the driveways entering and leaving the school. The project to widen the roads will include approximately 1,600 feet for road improvements, including deceleration lanes. The initial bid for the project was scheduled to open on March 29th. Unfortunately, we didn't have any qualified bidders for the project. Nobody bid the project on March 29th. So in accordance with General Statute 143-132A, the project was rebid and publicly opened on April 12, 2018. We had a single qualified bidder, being Morton Trucking Incorporated, with a bid proposal of $917,000. Morton Trucking is located in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Pinnacle Architecture has reviewed the qualifications of Morton Trucking Incorporated and has provided a letter of recommendation that's in your packet. After reviewing the responsible bidders, staff also recommends the awarding of the bid to Morton Trucking Incorporated with the following conditions. The project start date would commence upon board approval. The project would be completed by June 29th, 2018, and that's approximately 6 weeks prior to the school opening. Liquidated damages of $1,500 per day would be assessed if the project is not completed on time. And in addition to that, we also included a bonus of $10,000 if the project is completed before June 15th, 2018. So while we put a heavy penalty if they're late, we also want to give them a carrot if they were a couple weeks early as well. So at this point in time, staff would ask the board to consider approving the contract going forward with Morton Trucking Incorporated for $917,000.
I approve the motion.
Okay, we have a motion
Second.
and a second. Open for discussion and comments.
Yeah, I've got a few, as Madam Chair said, I have sent in some questions that I had with regards to this, and I think it's important for us to get this out to the public. Now, we're proposing a bid, or accepting a bid of $917,000. How much was the original estimate?
Our original estimate back in 2000, I believe it was 2016, was $600,000. That being said, when we started looking this contract here with the changing conditions over the last 2 or 3 years, has increased the bidding competition, as you would say, and so at that point in time, it has increased by $317,000. That being said, we've got contingency in place just for situations like this, and also we have seen some savings in other estimates that we've done. For example, with the sewer force main, we had estimated $300,000 for that. It came in at $179,000. So overall, within the project, we're well within our budget, and we're not exceeding the budget. And we're still, like I say, we're still within budget, and we anticipate being completed on time.
I'm concerned over the fact that the cost has increased a third more than what we estimated it at. And is there any indication why it came in so high?
One of the things that we looked at, as far as indications, they gave us the quote, but one of the things that we have to consider also is with the original general contractor's quote, he had some work doing some duct work next to the road. And with Morton Construction taking over this project, they said they would go ahead and do that duct work also for that price, which would give us a credit on the work that's being done on our contracted price for the general contract that we had originally. That being said, we haven't seen what the credit value is yet, but we know we're anticipating some decrease I mean, some offset from the 917,000 because they're doing some of the work that was gonna be done on the general contract as well.
So you're saying that the scope of the original project that we bid out for the general contractor for the construction,
There was a little bit of overlap right there, and they wanted, and so by doing this, they bid the whole thing right there to get it done, and then, they're gonna give us a credit for some of the work.
have they submitted a change order for that process?
They
yet?
haven't submitted a change order yet. Until we get this approved, we can't, I mean, but they are looking at giving us a credit for it.
Okay. Is that generally the procedure, that we would give somebody a credit before we get a change order in
We
process?
haven't got a credit yet.
I understand that,
So-
but what you're saying is this bid, increase in bid, you're saying was increased up to 917,000 in part because we're going to get a credit on part of the job that we've already bid out.
There was some overlap in the project, and so in that process, they looked at it, and Morton said, well, because Morton is the contractor that's doing the work on site as well. So in that process, we're gonna just include it in this one and take it off the other one. We haven't seen anything yet as far as what that credit is. So they're in the process of providing that detail for us.
Well, I have concerns with awarding the contract on a proposal that may or may not happen based on a gentleman's agreement shaking hands.
When we, as far as the contract itself is concerned, this contract right here, this is not, it wasn't a handshake agreement that we had at all, because, I mean, we would never do that in the first place. They bid based on the specs, and then after they gave us our bid, they informed us of this afterwards. So this was no intention of trying to say, okay, we're gonna get a credit for it, but after we looked at it in more detail, they said, well, we may be able to give you a credit afterwards.
So let me clarify, the scope of work that we put out for bid, the number that you have is on the scope of work that we put out for bid. If we get any credit for it, that's a plus for us down the road, but we're not, we cannot count on that at this time in this sequence for this, recommendation.
Did that
What
fit?
he's saying to you is nice if we get some credit from the general contractor saying it's not gonna cost us as much to do the job, but we are not bringing to the table any ideas that we're gonna get anything back based off the scope of work that we put out for bid. The scope of work we put out for bid is exactly what we bid out, and this is the price that they gave us.
Okay.
That's right.
And Steve, I don't
That's
want
correct.
to,
Please.
what you're saying is fine, but I just don't want to confuse the board.
That's right.
That the amount of work that we're asking for it to be done is, what the price is for.
But Steve, you're saying too that Morton is still gonna do the work.
Yes, ma'am.
Morton is a
Morton-
subcontractor already
Morton-
on
If
the
the
general,
board,
right?
Right.
the board approves the contract, Morton will be doing the work for the road widening and also for the road work and pavement done on site.
But they
as
were
well.
gonna do that anyway.
Right.
But, okay, so well, let's get it out in the open first of all. We only got one bid
Only
on
one
the
bid.
second round, right?
Mhm.
Because we got no bids on the first round.
That's correct.
All right, I just want the public to understand that there was no quid pro quo because they're already a subcontractor under the general contract that we awarded this in light of the fact that we're also
That's right.
giving them a $10,000 bonus if they finish the project early.
That's right. As a matter of fact, I would probably take offense if somebody said that we were doing a quid pro quo in this process.
Okay.
I would too. Earl, you had
I think we were all surprised at the amount, and particularly one bidder, but Onslow County is a busy place. A lot of development, a lot of road expansions and so forth, so I would think they can sort of pick and choose. Thank goodness we already had a contractor who was already there, who would be able to add this on. If we were to delay this item here today and go through the process again, how would it impact the opening of the school?
The DOT requires that we have the road work done prior to opening of the school. If we don't have it done in time, then we would have to go back to DOT and see if we get some kind of exceptions or waivers.
And you also said in your response that Onslow County Schools will be submitting for reimbursement for this project and anticipate reimbursement from DOT.
That's correct. DOT is.
Whatever the amount is.
Last year, DOT came up with the new policies or procedures where they would actually pay for the road work going into a school. After the project is done and we submit all the information.
So we're paying the money up front and they're gonna reimburse us?
That's right.
That's now law.
The original contract that we had with the general contractor obviously did include this portion, but it was on our scope of work for the overall project, is that correct?
It was on a,
Correct.
right, and one of the things too, if you remember, back when when the project came to fruition, the county, and grateful that the county did this, they actually moved the project up a year, okay, so we could actually get moving forward faster. Well, to move quickly, our scope of work included road widening and all the ancillary work outside the property itself, but requires extra permitting and extra requirements right there. So not to delay the project, we went ahead and had the scope of work done, completed, so we could start working in construction while we were continuing our planning process with DOT.
Was the project, the widening of the road, was that a DOT request, or was that something that we decided to do to make it easier for our process?
It's a DOT requirement.
Okay.
When we do, we bring in civil engineers to look at this, and in that process, they look at the road work, they look at the hydraulics for the roads, and the speeds. We do a traffic impact analysis. This process is in constant communication with DOT before we can even start work on it.
But it's a process that DOT requires us to do.
Yes.
We have to construct the road and then submit for reimbursement after the fact,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay.
And when we first started the project, I mean, they weren't reimbursing for the roads at that point. They would give you $25,000 for your parking for your buses. But that was the limit of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're saying that they would compensate for the road work being done as well.
Okay. And one of the problems that we've had with this is getting qualified bidders to bid on that. What is our bid network that we're utilizing to get the information out so that we throw the widest loop or the widest lasso that we can to snare the constructors to come in and help us?
Yeah, we've been fairly successful in the past with our process, and I think right now what's happening is there's a lot of construction going on, and it's just tight. But our process that we normally do is we always advertise on our website per statute. I think it's 143, 129. And also we send out send out advertisement to several media sources. One of them is greater diversity, so we make sure we hit the minority groups as well. And then we try to do Wilmington Star as much. I think the first bid we didn't do Wilmington Star, but then we do the Jacksonville Daily News, and we do the Raleigh News and Observer. So we try to get out there nationally, statewide as well into larger areas. In Raleigh, we do a lot of work get a lot of contractors out of Raleigh. Another thing that's done with contractors, it's ISQFT is a site. It's a construction management site, and the majority of contractors have access to this site, and we post on it, and so it lists out jobs that are national, regional, and local that any contractor can view, and we do this on a continuous basis as well. So we advertise on our own website, which is required by statute, and then we also go out to local newspapers, and we go and make sure we get some diversity too. We get into thegreaterdiversity.com, which reaches out to some minority areas as well, and then we also go out to Raleigh.
Do our forms have any indication on them when they bid on these projects? Is there any qualifications or questions perhaps that they can mark a block that tells us where they found us, how they found the opportunity to bid on our project?
I'm not sure. This is a formal bid process, and so we go out with architects, and the architects. I do know for this project itself. Okay, what we did is we contacted DOT even, and we got a list of all their contractors that they use for paving. We communicated to some of the local contractors to make sure that they were aware of it, and Pinnacle Architecture went through the list and contacted others. So I think they contacted the majority of the people that were on the DOT contract list.
So
they
we sent them letters to invite them to bid?
I think they did personal phone calls.
Okay.
Steve, thank you for including some of that, those advertisements. And it is on our website, so the public does have access to that. And I certainly hope you don't feel like that we're questioning what you've done, because I know you've done what you're supposed to have done.
Only thing we can do to provide clarification is better for everybody.
Steve, what is the significance of the bonus? It looks like 14 days, and if they finish, 14 days earlier, how does that affect our project? I guess my question is what are we getting to make it worth $10,000 since we're not opening until August?
What, one of the things is, I think the biggest thing when me and Randy from Pinnacle Architecture talked about it, because we wanted to make sure that the project was done by the end of the month on June 29th. And so we did put an aggressive penalty clause on it. And at that point in time, you have to realize too that all these contractors are booked up and they're busy as it is as well. So if we were going to do an aggressive penalty clause on them, we also want to make sure that we gave them a carrot to try to get done early as possible too. That's why we did 2 weeks early. We were doing 10,000. A lot of times when you do a draconian penalty clause, you try to entice them with something a little incentive in going forward.
So anytime we can get a contractor off-site that's completed the job early, it frees up other spaces for other contractors to get done quicker as well. So obviously, when you got road work done out front, and depending on what it looks like getting in and out of the complex,
And it would be nice to
have it done early. Plus, we can do our work quicker and easier if the road's complete.
And the other thought process in that too, it'd be nice to get the road work done before school lets out, so that way that road doesn't get blocked up anymore.
And this was known, is this known in the notification for bid? That was included?
It was in the bid specifications.
Okay.
So is the $10,000 the industry standard carrot that we?
I don't know if it's an industry standard, but I think it was a reasonable opportunity for them to get a bonus and stuff if they complete before school let out.
So my prior experiences in the other counties is we've had both of those occur. We've had higher penalties and higher bonuses depending on the emergency of trying to get something done during a quick turnaround time.
And Morton is okay with the $1,500 a day
Yes.
penalty?
Did you say that the incentives and the liquidated damages were in the bid?
They're in the, if you look in the contract, I think it's 4.5 and 4.6.
In the contract?
Right. And in the bid specifications themselves, the bid specifications,
Okay,
not the
in
bid,
the,
not
I
the
got you.
advertisement.
Not on the RFP?
Right, and
Okay.
in the bid
All right.
specifications themselves, what they do is they usually put a draft copy of the contract in there, and at 4.5 and 4.6 in the contract identifies.
Let me add one more thing. And during the advertising, my concern is, just like this board is, we want as many bidders as we can because we like the aggressiveness of somebody trying to win it. And keeping up with the architect and keeping up with Steve, I know a lot of phone calls were made and we were told that a lot of people were interested. But there again, when it comes time to open bids, we never know who's walking through the door. And obviously being the second time around, we knew what our options were pretty much at that time. So I'm glad the questions were asked so people know how we're doing business and how we put this out, and we'll re-examine it as well. But what we've done here is standard practice as well, wherever I've been in terms of how many places are actually reached out to. And it's not the first time I've been in a situation when up scope of work in our town right now is going crazy. And people are analyzing the jobs on how big they are and how much money they can make off it. And obviously, this job sounds big for what we're asking for today, but it's not big on the scope of things in terms of other jobs that they're looking at as well.
How many contractors participated in the pre-bid conference on March 22nd?
On March 22nd, we had one.
Who was that?
I don't remember the name right off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and, Dusty, do you remember who was right off the top of our head? But we can get that information for you.
Do we know why the contractor Morton Trucking did not bid on the first proposal?
When we did the bid opening, we didn't receive any indication why they didn't bid on the first one. I did have a conversation with Mr. Baker this morning and stuff, and he said that they weren't, that the one person wasn't aware of it, which is hard to believe because, I mean, they were reached out, I mean, we were reached out to, but we made sure they were contacted the second time around.
Steve, it makes sense to me that the company that's gonna do the original road work complete the project.
Yes,
That
ma'am.
way you don't have these fingers pointing at each other, and hopefully there'll be a better transition in getting that work done.
It's just a continuation of work, which will make it easier for them. They can stage up and get the work done all at one time.
Any other comments or questions?
I kind of worry about long-term, Steve. We got a lot of projects coming up in the next few years. Are we gonna just get one bid, you know what I mean? Having to bid it twice, it takes a lot of time from you.
It takes a little bit more time, it's a little bit more concerning. But our next projects that come up, large-scale formal bid projects like that for a school is a little bit larger in scope, I mean, quite a bit larger in scope when you're talking about,
Dollar amount.
yeah, less than $1 million all the way up to about $25 million. That's a big difference, and so we usually get a lot more contractors involved, general contractors, larger
If the
contractors.
contractors are that busy, is it gonna bump the price up?
The value added,
course.
yeah, we'll have to
Sure.
look at the value added in terms of how we build schools. Obviously, this building that we're doing in Richlands was a value added building that we got, what was it, in our, you know, total price was very reasonable. But looking at that price again, even from a year from now,
Steel's gone
you
up
know,
about 25%.
everything is on the uptick, so we're expecting that number not to be the same.
We-
Go ahead, man.
I would think that looking at the cost of other schools, that probably anywhere from $10 to $15 million will be added to the price of our schools that we're gonna build in the future.
I'd like to make a recommendation, if we could, that we get more frequent briefings. We have a policy that says that we will get periodic briefings on these, and I don't think the periodic is as periodic as what I'd like to see. I'd like to have, you know, maybe a monthly, a minimum of quarterly on what progress we're doing. We're not gonna get out of the building business anytime soon.
Something we,
Whatever the pleasure of the board on that is, we'll be glad to submit that.
I think that's a reasonable request. We have a motion and a second for this, so all in favor of awarding the bid to Morton Construction, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Good discussion, y'all. You learn a lot. And I thought every question was very good. Okay, Mr. Money Man. What I want to know is, did you stay up last night reciting this to yourself?
No, I didn't. You probably wish I had, but we'll try to work through this together. Can you pass that clicker to me?
Are you sure it's not a presentation that we could just recite for you?
Well, you're gonna see a lot of common things from past years, and that's because we stay pretty consistent in what we do in our budgeting, and, you know, we had the same types of needs from year to year. But there will be some interesting changes, I think you'll find as we go through this, and I'll point those out as we go along. So, welcome back to Budgeting 101 here. We're starting up the budget process for fiscal year 2019, and we would be remiss if we didn't take a trip down memory lane here and review the funding formula that we have in place. That's kind of the basis of where everything starts now, and how we begin the process of building our budget. And there are some interesting points that are being implemented this year in this area that are a little different than past years. So first of all, the Joint Education Funding Policy was adopted back in 2014 by both the Board of County Commissioners and the Board of Education. And this created a partnership in education to benefit all students and citizens of Onslow County. The great thing about the Joint Education Funding Policy is that it does provide an objective method for determining the funding levels each year using independent third-party data, and that provides both the county and the school system a way to do long-range planning, know what's coming up, and not have surprises. Many folks have attended meetings around the state where there was the Board of Education, School Board Association meetings, or whether it's finance officer meetings, superintendent meetings, or county commissioner meetings, and they all hear that, this is a method that should be a model for the state, because it's a comprehensive approach in funding between counties and school districts. There are three main legs of three legs of the funding policy, and like a stool to have balance, you got to have at least three legs in there to keep balance, and that's what this stool does for us. It provides certainty and stability in the three areas: the annual current expense fund budget, the annual capital outlay budget, and also the long-range capital improvement program. Looking at the first leg of the funding policy, the annual current expense budget, this is the area where we receive funding from the county to cover things that are either unfunded or underfunded by the state. Some of those primary areas are things like teacher salary supplements, a lot of our technology program, paying for utilities and maintenance, insurance. Those are examples of things that are in the local current expense funds. The formula that's used in determining the amount is based on average daily membership, and that number is multiplied by the state average of per pupil appropriations for all counties across the state. And last year, fiscal year 2018, the county appropriation totaled $49.3 million.
That doesn't include capital.
That's right. That's just this portion, the local current expense portion. We'll come up on capital in a moment. So the average daily membership, as you know, has grown continuously over the years. Every year it seems we're going up about 300 students or more. And the fiscal year 2019 budget, next year's budget calculation, is based on average daily membership of 26,779, reflecting growth of 435 over the previous year. That also includes the pass-through that we have to do for charter school students. The state average per pupil appropriation across North Carolina has increased from the previous year. Last year we used 1,870, and for the upcoming year we will be using 1,928. So the fiscal year 2019 county appropriation, doing that multiplication there, gets us to $51.6 million. About a $2.4 million increase that's necessary just to maintain the relative position in the state towards average funding. Now, while Onslow County Schools is the 12th largest school district in the state, we're not the 12th highest in per pupil appropriation. I wish we were. In fact, we're far from the very top. Dare County came in at $4,226 per ADM. That's the highest county district amount in the state. So you can see, with us coming in at the $1,928 figure, we are well below that, less than half of being at the top. Keep in mind that this calculation is done using the most recently published figures that are available statewide. So as we're planning the budget for next fiscal year, we're actually using the average daily membership from the current fiscal year we're in now, because that obviously won't be published until after next year's over. So using last year's student number to figure out how much funding we're getting for next year, with the growth that we have each year, you know that we will be behind in that. Also, the state average per pupil appropriation is something that's published after a fiscal year is completed. So not only do we not have those figures for this fiscal year from across the state, and not having it for next year, we have to go to last year's number. So that is 2 years behind the year that we're funding. So we're always going to be, with this formula, 1 year behind in student numbers, 2 years behind in the per pupil appropriation. So you can see that's going to cause us to actually lag behind the state average. However, this is a vast improvement from where we were prior to having the funding formula. We used to be $8, $9, $10 million short per year had we had average funding. And this brings us closer to state average and allows us to continue to track forward as the per pupil appropriations across the state increase and as our population increases, allows us and the county to plan for that. So it's a very valuable process for us to have in place. All right, the second leg, the annual capital budget. This provides funding for major repairs and renovations such as roofing, HVAC, paving, safety and security issues, and a whole host of other things that I'm sure Dusty could tell you about for days and days over there. In the joint education funding policy, we had to make up for some serious cuts that we had received back during the recessionary time. And during that time, our $3 million budget that we had been getting historically, year in, year out, flat funded, back to 2002, 2003 and prior, we had to get that built back up just to the $3 million amount to get to nominal dollars of where we had been. So part of the joint education funding policy was a way to step that back up over the course of a few years to get back to that dollar figure. The funding remained level after we got back to that in 2018, or prior year remained level this year, 2018. And in the joint education funding policy, it called for increases beginning in fiscal year 2019, and that would involve looking at the assets that have increased in the district, such as the number of square feet that you have to take care of, and also a specific consumer price index. And as you can imagine, our needs have grown significantly over time. When you go back to kind of that baseline period where we were talking about 2002, 2003, think about all the schools that we built, all the classroom expansions that have been built, how all the other existing buildings have gotten older each year and requiring more maintenance, repair, and upkeep. Also, the value of money over that time has changed as prices increase, and if you're staying in flat dollars, you're losing your purchasing power. So I'd like to pass these out. This might be helpful to you. First of all, this is just a copy of the joint education funding policy that we have posted on our website, just to have it handy for your convenience if you take one and pass those around. And then after I touch on that, I've got a little information about the part about moving this funding forward based on the joint education funding policy I'd like to share with you. If you also take one of those.
I got close to papers here.
Somebody's paying for a lot of paper.
Well, these papers might very well be worth it, as you'll hear in just a moment.
I'm kidding.
So on the first handout that I sent around, the copy of the joint education funding policy, if you'll flip over to the bottom of page 2, and that's where it begins, section 2. It says, as to the annual capital budget. And at the bottom, that's where it talks about stepping up the funding for those years to get back to the nominal dollar value, the $3 million that we'd historically been at 2002, 2003 and prior. And then it talks about in beginning of fiscal year 19, how we consider additional funding level based on needs. So if you flip to page 3, up top on page 3 under A, it has the first data point that will be used is the annual average index percentage of the most recent consumer price index for all items, all urban consumer CPIU within the South region, size class BC is determined by the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's one data point we're going to use. What has happened to the value of money over this period of time? What has happened to the purchasing power of a dollar over a period of time? The second one there, B, is the growth in public assets inventory of the school system. In other words, one of the primary changes that we have is changes in square footage. There's also opportunity here for changes in responsibility for transportation or other services between state and local levels of government, allowing you to take into account things that the state may have pushed off onto local funding or other mandates that have come up that may cause us increased costs. And of course, a prime example there may be with the K-3 class size reductions that are impacting our classrooms. So if you flip to your second handout that I gave you, and on this one it starts off databases, tables, and calculations by subject. This is pulled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and you can see on there the annual percentage rates for this specific price index that was called for in the funding agreement. And so going back with using 2002 as the base year, started looking at the growth beginning in 2003 all the way through 2017. Obviously, we've not completed 2018, so we wouldn't have that figure until after the calendar year is complete. So those are the increases annually that you see there. And then if you flip to the second page, this is simply taking those CPI percentage increases and looking at the effect of that over time. And you see in that last column, you can see the factor that has increased since baseline of 2002 year has gone up 35.9% in the value of what that dollar could purchase for you back then versus now. And then if you flip to the third page, this shows the assets of the district, the square footage. Again, going back to baseline data, you can see back in 2002, 2003, there was a total of 2,944,480 square foot of our buildings throughout the district. And if you compare that with the upcoming year, we will be at 3,838,614 square feet. So you can see in there we've got some additional buildings that we'll have to maintain, take care of. Of course, coming up next year will be the Skills Center. We've also added in Carolina Forest Elementary, Meadowview Elementary, Stateside Elementary, and numerous classroom expansions throughout the county back during the 2005 bond and COPS program that went on at that time. So there's been a major amount of square footage increase over that time.
Jeff, excuse me, I know
Sure.
you're on a roll. Does this include anything with the early college? Do we do any maintaining of any building?
We do not, and therefore it's not included
Okay.
on this. At this point, we're not responsible for that, so we didn't factor that.
Okay, the other question is, what about outside supposedly temporary buildings?
Those were not worked in here and probably should be a part of that. I don't know that there has been a tremendous amount of growth in that over the years. There have been some, but I don't know there's been a tremendous amount of square footage that would impact this drastically. But I certainly see your point. That would be an increase there. And it looks like coming up in the next few years, we will have to make some major increases there. So that's a good point. If we go to the last page here, we can see the calculations. This basically summarizes, if we take the baseline funding that we had back in 2002, 2003, and $3 million, and divide that out by the square footage that we had, the 2.9 million square feet, come up with $1.02 per square feet back then. Well, what does that look like today? What would you need today to have that same purchasing power? And again, that's why that specific price index was named in the joint education funding policy. So going through that calculation that you saw on the previous pages, and you do an increase to the $1.02 per square foot. In today's dollars, you would need $1.39 to have that same purchasing power. Take that figure on here and multiply it by the new square footage total. That would yield an adjusted funding level for fiscal year 2019 would be at just over 5.3 million. Now we currently stand at that flat 3 million, so that's approximately 2.3 million increase just to get us on par with the purchasing power that we had way back in 2002, 2003 on a square footage basis, and taking into consideration the expanded facilities that we now have to take care of. So this is really just to kind of establish us back on par with where we were.
Madam Chair, this is not an action item, right? Today?
No, it is not.
Okay. I'd like to ask a quick question then. When we did the joint funding policy back in 2014, did we utilize the 2003 or 2002 adjusted base numbers for square footage, or did we use what we currently had?
Well, this is the funding policy and what was included in that. The discussions that we had at that time involved getting back to that level there where we had been funded and trying to have a way to move that forward.
How did we come up with the $3 million is what my question is.
That's the funding level that we had back in 02, 03, and probably for several years prior. And it had been flat funded for a number of years. So this was to try to get to the same type of funding base that we were at back then that has eroded over time without any increases.
So we weren't at 3 million when the funding formula came about.
Right.
We were half of that, I think.
But we were in 2002, 2003.
Right, so we actually had a decrease over time, so we were just trying to get a baseline back to where we were at the highest level, which was in 02 at 3 million. So that's where we started at in terms of funding formula, and that was a gradual, I believe. It took us a couple years to get to that.
Yeah, and it's laid out in here.
It's laid out in there, but once we got to that, there was another way of calculating how we would get up
Well,
to actually
I
funding this.
think that on Roman numeral 2, as to the capital budget, it says that at the bottom, that every 4 years thereafter, you'll consider other
Correct.
ways.
Yeah. And in thinking about, and I know, that's a fairly sizable number in this change, but when you let something go for so long, that's the problem you run into, is that you get so far behind, it makes it harder to do a catch-up. And so that's kind of what this is in a catch-up. We're just playing catch-up. In terms of this going forward, it'd be very minimal increases to keep it going. If we were already at that, 5.3 million now, in order to sustain this in an average year, and let's say you had about a 2.1, seemed to be about the average CPI increase on there, you're looking at just a little over $100,000 a year increase.
And how much do we anticipate that we could use every year if we could get it?
Well, way, that's exactly where we're going next, and it's way more than the total that we have now. In fact, when you get to Steve's presentation, you will see how he has needs well beyond this, and you've seen it before in his previous presentations, where he's talked about all the scheduled maintenance that needs to be done, the roofs, HVAC, all the systems that need to be replaced, and how those needs far exceed what we have in here. And then you add on top of that these immediate needs that have been thrust upon us, we're dealing with additional mobile classrooms that we need. So you'll see that the needs far exceed even this number, and will continue to do so.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for pointing that out. All right. See, I told you it'd be something a little interesting and different than this one this year. So, just in recap, the capital outlay budget was restored to the pre-2003 funding level of $3 million back in fiscal year 17. That funding level remained flat at $3 million in 2018, with the increases scheduled to begin in 2019. We've had significant changes over time, both in the additional school sites and expansions to many campuses throughout the district. We just talked about the impacts since 2003 era funding level, the increase in square footage of nearly 1 million square feet in that period of time. The changes in the value of the dollar and what that can purchase based on the consumer price index that's named in the Joint Education Funding Formula. So bringing us just to on parity with where we were back then based on square footage now and the increased cost per square foot, that gets us to 5.3 million, 2.3 million over current level funding. All right, now we'll move into the third leg of the Joint Education Funding Policy. And this is the area that deals with long-range capital improvements, such as new school buildings, building additions, major improvements and renovations, and system replacements. The capital long-range planning portion deals with a 10-year planning horizon. Some of the previous projects that have been done, as you know, are Dixon Middle School that opened this year, Richlands Elementary School that'll be opening in the fall. There are 3 additional schools and 1 expansion on that first 10-year horizon that was scheduled out. And the board has committed to revisiting this with the commissioners to continue laying out that 10-year planning horizon. And I know in the previous meeting that you had with the Board of Commissioners, you began those discussions, and that we had the need to get back together to detail that a little more. And part of that discussion was also focused on the accelerated needs that we have due to the state mandated K-3 class sizes and how that has caused the need for us to push up the timetables on the building projects where possible. It's also going to force us to do some temporary measures with mobile classrooms. And so we need to have additional planning sessions between this board and the Board of Commissioners to work on those. One of the ideal things, I know that had been mentioned in the previous workshop, would be if we could go ahead and build both of the next 2 elementary schools at the same time. We have one scheduled to begin architectural design this September. If the next school to follow 2 years behind that could be moved up and done at the same time, that could save a lot of headache and probably a lot of dollars. One, we would have both of those schools that have been identified on that side of the county, both the new Dixon area elementary and the Catherine's Lake, Richlands type area, coming on at the same time, so you'd only have 1 round of redistricting to do on that entire side of the county. So that would be a relief to a lot of the students and parents there. In addition, we talked earlier about increased costs that we're seeing in construction. We believe, based on trends, that's only going to get worse over time, and by delaying construction, prices will just go up more, which would ultimately result in higher costs to the building program. It's also likely, as you hear reports in the media about, what the Fed may do with interest rates and what's going to happen with the borrowing capacity there. So it would be more economical if the county looks at it and determines that they have the capacity to move that second school out up to coincide with the first one. It could ultimately save a lot of money, a lot of headaches, and help us start reaching our goal of meeting some class size and class capacity issues that we're trying to address. So we look forward to helping the board in any way in preparing for additional joint meetings with the Board of Commissioners to work towards those ends or whatever it is that you wish to work towards.
Is the county already looking at whether or not that acceleration will be possible, or is that something we need to meet again to get started?
Well, we've had some discussions, staff to staff, saying, would you get with your financial consultants that they use that help build that funding model for this portion of the funding formula, where they determine how much they need when to meet those debt service payments. And so they're in a process of working through that to try to prepare some information for their board and this board to consider. It may be a possibility that they could move something forward, and I'm hopeful that they'll find that that's something that they can do to address this.
I spoke with Commissioner Bright about that, and as soon as, they're in their budget cycle
Sure.
too, and they've got a lot more to deal with than we do, that we'll try to have that meeting as soon as possible.
One of the things I noticed in the joint funding formula is that in fiscal year 2019, we projected borrowing in June of 2019 for the next school. But I didn't see that reflected in the capital budget in the documents that you gave us.
Well, that's because that's a function of the county commissioners. They're the ones that budget for that, and they're also the ones that set the revenue cycle that they're going to get to fund this. And actually, over the time as we've been doing this, because of prudent practices and in the way designing school, value engineering, some fortunate bidding and things like that, we've been able to bring some of the costs down. They've been able to come in under some of their projections at that point. And, if you'll recall, they actually moved up the Richlands Elementary School timetable by 1 year. Again, this is something that they work with their financial advisors on as to what they need when to fund that pot of money that takes care of the debt service on this. And they kind of tweak that based on what's coming down the trail.
Would we not, though, need to put that into our capital budget process if we're going to anticipate doing that, even though they are the funding source? They're the ones that ultimately have to determine when it's funded and what is funded. But if we're planning on building a new school, the architectural phase of this, I would assume, starts in 2019.
Actually, the next school start in
2018.
in September of 2018, and then the school following that is 2 years behind. And what could be a request from this board is for that second school out to move it up so we can begin architectural design for both of them in this year. And that's where I was saying that
So
a
our
joint
RFPs
meeting
would go out for architect review, for us to review like we did the last time for all review plans to come in, and that would probably be somewhere in June. And that way plans could be submitted to us by September for the one building that we already have on the funding formula. So if we have two, that's the reason. The sooner we understand that, then we might have to speed that process up for that second school as well.
Doesn't the funding have to be approved before we can go to that process?
Well, the funding's been approved for, the first one school coming up.
Yeah,
That's why I'm asking why it's not in the local. capital budget.
Well, because we.
Well, that's a
we-
different
we-
process.
Yeah, we don't fund that. They actually, pay the checks from over there. We, send them the invoices and all that. So, it ultimately becomes a part of the budget as they approve the project and all that, and we also track it on our side as well. Right now, we don't have the authorization to just say, yeah, we want to do this second school now. And that's where I was saying, another meeting between the
I'm
boards.
not referring to the second school, I'm referring to the first school.
Yeah, it's already,
Same thing.
It's already been,
yeah, it's approved.
It's been approved, but it's
Right.
not in the budget, that's what I'm saying.
but it's not our budget.
I understand that as well, but I would think if we're submitting the budget to them, they're going to approve their budget based on what we submit, so it would
Yeah,
make sense to me that if we're going to build a new school, start the construction process in 2019,
Right.
and the funding's approved in that we would submit it in this year's
I understand what
budget,
Bob's
so-
saying, but I know
And-
what,
Yeah, and just, I guess the way we've handled that is, we send them the local current expense fund budget and show them the calculation of how we do that. We do the capital outlay, which this year's looks a little different with, bringing it up to speed, so we'll have to submit that to them. But then on the long-range planning, basically that's handled, through a letter from this board to that board, saying our funding request is, this amount for local current expense fund, this amount for the capital outlay fund, and for continued funding of the long-range planning as laid out in here. And so they build that into their budget. In terms of what type of revenue generation they have to do on that, that's up to them because they're gonna look at several things. They're gonna look at what capacity they may have there through just growth of existing levels that could be applied towards it. They may also look at debt service capacity that's coming off, maybe projects that are completing the debt service, whether it's school properties or debt service coming off things that they built for the county that may be able to go towards this. And they'll have to look at, within all their resources, how they go about making sure that the funding level is in place for that. So it's a little bit beyond what we do here.
Isn't that part of the budget amendment process, once we
it can be,
can?
but it's their budget
their
item.
budget,
It's
it's
not
not
our
ours.
budget item.
So if we're gonna make that request, we need to go ahead and do it now.
Well, they know the one school's going to be planning for that.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're going to ask them to accelerate the second school to match the next school, that would be something that I guess would have to formally come from the board and through perhaps joint planning or through some discussions that you have us work staff to staff to try to work that out and get out to the two boards. But yes,
Well-
we should be looking at what the request would be and asking them to examine if they have the capacity to do that.
Not to take away from this discussion that all of us are concerned about, 2 new schools being built as soon as possible. We had this discussion as a board, and I think we agreed that we needed to do that. We've also given staff the direction to look at building sites, so that will be coming back to us. But today, we're here to talk about this budget, so we need to probably really put our attention on that.
Okay, that's a good segue to my next slide. So today, Vance, we're here focused primarily on local current expense fund and the capital outlay fund. Looking at the timelines for this, today we have the superintendent's recommended budget. It's being submitted to the Board of Education. It's required that that occur before May 1, so we're ahead of schedule on that. Board of Education will consider the budget recommendation and submit the approved budget to the Board of County Commissioners by May the 15th, and the commissioners are required to adopt their budget by July 1. So starting off with the local current expense fund, and local current expense fund funds several things, everything from instruction positions and instructional support positions, supplies and materials, those type of things that go along with that, exceptional children's program, technology, support, maintenance, utilities, insurance, parts of transportation, they're not funded by the state, cultural arts and athletics, and other necessary items. And in your packet, you've got the copy of the breakdown on this budget. Got 11 pages, break this down. This is broken down into functional areas. So you start off, you've got regular instructional services, and then it goes into vocational curricular services, children with disabilities, etc. And so it breaks it down into the functional areas throughout that. That is also followed up on page 11, displays the revenues that are associated with this budget. And then the following page is unnumbered, but the page that follows page 11 is the local current expense fund broken down by programmatic carrier. So that's kind of the layout of the local current expense fund budget. The way this process worked is we received input from all schools and departments and had to consider the request in light of available funding and increased costs that were mandated to take care of. And this budget proposal is designed to maintain existing operations. Now, some of the key factors that occur in this budget, we've already mentioned K-3 class size restrictions, and you'll hear more about from the capital side in a moment from Steve and impacts with mobile units. But over on the operational side, there was actually a bright spot there. As you recall, the recent legislation that the North Carolina General Assembly passed that one staggered the implementation of the K-3 class size, and coupled with that an enhancement teacher allotment that will help offset some of the costs there. And so that being able to push some of these costs back into the state budget is reflected in our local budget here. So that's a little bit of a bright spot. Typically what we're dealing with is more of increased costs that are mandated for us. And we have the potential state salary adjustments. We've not started hearing anything out of Raleigh as to what those will be. This is an election year, and typically election years fare a little better for increases in salary adjustments than other years, particularly if the economy is doing well. And so may see some decent increases there. Looking at past years, they've typically done about $1,000 per individual, or you looking in other years back before we hit the recession, 2 or 3% from the state was not uncommon. Plus, we also have the local salary step schedule for cost of living increases, and those average about 2%. So all that has to be built into the existing salaries that are out there just to keep pace with upcoming costs.
Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Quick question with regards to, we're talking about the local current expense funding, but those salaries that we pay at the local expense have to match whatever the state provides.
That's exactly right. We, as a school district in North Carolina, you pretty much don't control any of your revenues or any of your expenses. They're mandated for you. And so on the expense side, the state tells us, what the salary increase will be. They do that on the state positions and somewhat adjust for that in most cases there. But the local side has to be adjusted as well for local, federal programs and all that. And each of those programs receive no additional money from the state to cover that, yet we're expected to match that same type salary increase, even though it's being paid from a different pot of money, because you wouldn't want different sets of employees being treated differently or simply because they were paid from a different funding source. So there's that. Also, things that we don't control is the employer's retirement contribution rate. The state sets that rate, and again, same rate for state as well as local and other funds. That is, in the biennial budget, was set to go from 17.13% to 18.44%, which is nearly an 8% increase in retirement costs. And we have seen that grow dramatically over the last several years. Employers' health insurance contribution is another area. State of North Carolina sets that. They send us the bill, tell us how much it's going to be. That's been growing at a 4% rate the last couple of years. It's been actually higher than that in some previous years, but based on the biennial budget that come out, we're anticipating a 4% increase in that area. These are major factors in driving our budget. In fact, that's the primary thing. As you know, we're very heavily dependent on personnel for what we do. And that's how we operate. And so when you've got such a heavy dependency on personnel costs and you have these state mandated increases in salaries, retirement contribution rate, hospitalization rates, that's going to be the major driving factor. So just to try to keep up with that, you'll spend most of your increase for budget on that area. Looking at a few other items that have impact on this budget. You'll recall last year there was a decision by this board to, at long last, address the experience level payment for the classified employees as they come in. Folks that are on the certified pay schedule, they already get adjusted to where they're at on the state pay schedule, because the state lays out a specific pay schedule. And if a teacher comes in here and the state says they've got 17 years experience, and they get placed on that step 17 of the state schedule. On the classified employees, there's no such thing. Every district sets their own rates. The state sets a minimum, maximum, but we have a local salary schedule. And it had been the procedure here that when someone comes in, they would start at that very base 0 step schedule for most of the frontline type positions, which makes it difficult when you're trying to recruit someone that has experience out in the field, particularly in competitive fields. You're trying to get somebody to take care of HVAC issues or whatever. You want to be competitive and be able to recruit those people. Plus you want to retain the ones you have so they're not leaving you to go out somewhere else. And so this board recognized that, and last year you approved putting in place where we could have the steps placed for that initial placement when these positions come in. And so we looked at that, we implemented the plan as a mid-year plan. We started January 1. So this past year, there was only half the cost to get a full year implementation, knowing that this year we'd have to come back with additional increase so that we would have full year level funding for that. And so that is built into this budget so that we can do that. The way that plan worked out, and we did this through surveying the employees, asking them what credible experience that they had that they could document, and HR went through a process of validating that to make those adjustments. And it worked out that the plan we were able to implement was allowing a 1 year for 1 year experience placement on the steps up to a maximum of 10 for these frontline classified positions. And so I have to say the classified employees are very thankful to you for that. You've done a great job in helping reward their experience, because obviously we had to take care of our own, take care of the people who are already in positions before you can start allowing new hires to come in. You wouldn't want someone who's already been working here for several years not have that credit, and then somebody come in and on day one, they're jumping to a higher salary placement than someone who's been working with you for several years and didn't get that opportunity.
Jeff, one of the things I'd like to thank the board for doing this, because it's helped out the classified staff tremendously. But also, we talked just earlier today about how construction contracts are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. What that means is that some of these skilled trades that we have in-house, it's harder to fill those positions, and with this, it's actually helping us out, because we're competing with the contractors to get qualified staff to work with us.
Thank you, Steve. Again, given that our main driver costs here are with salaries and related benefits, after that, there's not a whole lot left that we could address in this budget for requests. But some of those things that were addressed, there's a minor amount for safety and security items, such as monitoring services, camera maintenance, the Identikid licenses that where we badge the people that are coming into the schools. So there's some minor amounts in there for that. We have to keep in mind we are opening up the Eastern North Carolina Regional Skill Center this coming year. And so while the instructional staff will be part of the CTE instructional program, there is the administrative staff that have to be there, the director, office support, and so those positions are built into this budget so that we can open the skill center. Utility costs have gone up. We had to put in increases in utility costs to match that. Workers' compensation insurance has seen some growth in that area, unfortunately, and we're having to put in for that. And also, there's a pretty significant jump in the charter school pass-through. You know, we basically have to be the collection agency for the charter schools, the way it works in statute in North Carolina. We have to get the money from the county, and then we have to turn around and write the checks out to the charter schools. So we basically become a pass-through on that. And so we had to build in significant increases with that. There's a new charter school that was built down on the New Hanover-Pender County line that opened up this year that picked up about 25 students there and probably experienced some growth, plus there's some growth over at Hvac and growth with the virtual charter schools. And so those amounts are built in there simply so we can pass it along.
Jeff, I'm sorry, Bob.
Could you explain that a little bit more? New Hanover, Pender County charter school, now how does that affect us up here?
Because the student resides in Onslow County, we are required to send the money to the charter school wherever the charter school is located.
They could go to a charter school anywhere.
Even online school.
The virtual schools, we also have to do that. In fact, years ago, we haven't had it in several years, but I know there's some specialized needs for some very special needs children. I think Crossnor Academy is located up in the mountains of North Carolina. It's like a residential type thing. And I know years ago we had to send some money up there, but we do that wherever the charter school is located as we're required to by law.
Jeff, why can't we charge indirect cost since we manage that fund that goes to someone outside of us?
I would love to do that. Unfortunately,
Why can't
it's not allowed in statute.
Well, that just isn't fair.
I've discovered in life there's a lot of things that aren't fair that I have to deal with.
And, Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
follow up. Once we identify the student or students who are going to the charter school, we send a check, but they decide it's not working out for them, and they come back to us. The money doesn't come back. It stays
Right. We've
with the charter school.
right. We've
Although we're now
traditionally
responsible.
done this based on first month ADM, and keeping things apples to apples. You know, we use our first month ADM and their first month ADM, and keep that consistent throughout, because, you know, both have fluctuations in the year.
Well, you know, on the state level, they're saying the money follows the child, and we know that's not really true. What do you think, and this is not why we're here, but since we're talking about charter schools, with the Secretary of Education making changes so that military can go to charter schools, how will that be, will that affect our funding from the county if they come inside our county for charter schools?
Well, fortunately, that didn't go through in the original budget bill that was passed for this year. I know there is discussion now of another bill at the federal level that will basically undo portions of the budget bill, which it could include that. In fact, I just heard the other day that that is a discussion item, and so I would encourage you to speak with our representatives at the federal level to point out what that would do to us. It's my understanding that they would basically cut federal impact aid funding and turn it into vouchers that go to these other students, but it's simply because they are dependent, and they may not even be doing a charter school. It may be a home school. It may be any kind of situation. In fact, the original information I heard was saying that it was actually kind of like birth through 21. So it's impacting a lot of population. If they want to fund those type vouchers and they want to move forward, they should seek their own funding source for that, but not cut the impact aid program, because we're still required to provide all those services and meet all the needs of our military dependent students and their families through all the transitions that they have to do. Our costs don't get cut, so they shouldn't be coming out of our funding. And some of these would be students that aren't even in our schools in the first place. So it's cuts that would be received throughout, and it would impact the entire nation. So it could be drastic.
Thank you for letting me interject that. I think this is something we need to be putting in the back of our heads.
Madam Chair, would you forward that to us at some point? Because I really have no clue exactly what y'all are talking about. Is there something I can read it? Yeah, because I don't.
Madam Chair, I just have one question for Jeff about the school lunch programs.
Yes, sir.
Are we, with what we implemented earlier about the principals mandating and overseeing that, how is it impacting our budgetary requirements now?
I'm glad you brought that up. It's actually a little bit of a bright spot in our budget. You'll notice in there that the amount that we budgeted for the transfer child nutrition program, as you know, we are required to refund the child nutrition program for any unpaid meal charges. And that number had grown over the last few years. Last year, it actually went down significantly from the prior year, and this year we seem to be holding our own with that so far. And so that has made me comfortable with actually reducing the budget that we have in there to cover those unpaid meal charges. And if we continue seeing that trend going forward, we'll be able to continue bringing that down. So I think it's having some positive effects.
So have we received any kind of feedback from our principals as to is it a difficult task to implement or?
Yeah, it's very difficult, even with the added efforts of reaching out and being the caretakers, and sometimes principals are frustrated that they have to be the caretakers of collecting food charges for child nutrition, but obviously it's a collaboration of child nutrition managers and our principals working hand in hand, trying to reach out and making sure we alert parents when fees are actually there. And principals have taken it to heart and have documented on how to reaching out. I think they're doing all they can at this point because of all the conversations we've had over it. And we've had the reduction, like he said, that we saw from past years. It's just, we're never gonna get it down to a zero budget or a zero balance. And we're still feeding the children, which is the most important part.
Could you provide us with a comparison for the last year versus this year under the new program?
Well, we get it in our budget monthly, don't we?
No.
That's not an update that I do, that'd be something we'd need to get from Child Nutrition
We can
Program.
We can do that. We provide monthly reports, so we can do that.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I'd just like to be able to see the effectiveness of that, and if it has negligible, effect on it, maybe we need to revisit and look again.
Well, I think there are two things. One, on the fiscal side, it probably is beneficial to us. But on the human side, are we feeding less kids? I think that's what I would be concerned about.
Me too.
All right, we've got continued costs and expansion item requests totaled over $65.5 million. And we only had available revenues, including a fund balance appropriation of $7 million, to reach a total of $59.3 million. So obviously there were numerous expansion items that were deferred. Here are a few of the most pertinent items that we had requests to expand on, but we're not able to expand them at this time. First of all, particularly in discussion with our principals, they would really like to see us move forward on increase of the supplement. We currently stand at 10%, which is a very solid supplement. We tend to be one of the higher supplements, at least in this part of the state or outside the major metropolitan areas. So from that standpoint, we're doing quite well with the supplement level we're at. However, we have to compete with the Wake counties and the Charlotte-Mecklenburgs and those places. So anything that we can do to enhance our ability to recruit and retain teachers is very important. So that's an area that we will continue to monitor, and as various funding sources begin to become consistent moving forward and we see where we can make some progress in that area, we would like to pursue that. There were requests of moving this up, actually up into the maybe 12 to 15%. Obviously, everybody's realistic and knows that can't happen overnight, and may not be able to get quite that high at all, but making movement in that area. For instance, a 1% increase in supplement along with benefits would probably cost about $1.2 million. So that's something that I'm unable to move forward with at this time, but we want to continue to monitor that, and hopefully in some upcoming budget years, we may be able to make a little movement in that area. Well, one of the keys there is once you get that, you want to sustain that. You don't want to go back and every year when the state increases state salaries, that has an impact on what we have to match here. So we have to be very careful as we move forward with that to make sure it's a sustainable type approach. There are also requests, as we have every year, for additional support positions at schools, and this could range anywhere from designated instructional support, could be instructional coaches, could be testing assistants. There's a number of things that the schools could utilize that would be very valuable to them, but at this point we're unable to put that in. If we were just to put one in at each school with salaries and benefits, probably talking around the neighborhood about $2.9 million. So it's not an area that we could move forward with at this time. Part of that also, as you know, there's a lot of discussion right now about safety and security around the state. And one of the things that would be beneficial to have, as you know, many people have pointed out, would be to have SROs in all of our schools. We currently have them in middle schools and high schools. But adding in another 20 SROs is a pretty heavy lift to do. And when you look at where the state is right now, that is something that the state is addressing in the legislature. They're currently discussing safety and security for schools. They're discussing the possibility of additional funding in that area, as well as behavioral and mental health support. And so at this point, I think we are best to maybe revisit some of our planning efforts that have been done in the past in terms of what we can do on our campuses for safety and security, updating that to today, making plans for where we want to go, and at the same time, monitor what the state is doing to see what they can provide so that we can try to dovetail our plans with resources that they may be able to provide. But it's,
Are all the SROs, are they all county-funded positions?
well, they're all funded through Onslow County Schools. We pay them through our state at-risk allotment.
Okay.
And we have the officers that are within the Jacksonville city limits come through Jacksonville Police Department, and those that are outside of Jacksonville come from the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
But we fund them for the 180 days of school, and then those departments fund them for the additional days in the year that they're employed with those agencies. So that's how that works. So that is something we hope to get some movement on from the state, and anxiously await to see what they may be able to provide. And also, we don't want to get out ahead of things, because sometimes funding comes for, we'll provide this additional funding if you don't currently have it in place. And if you jumped out ahead of it, you may not be able to obtain those funds if they put some type of a clause like that in there. So again, we know that's an area that we want to continue to study and try to make some recommendations for movement as we move forward.
Your organization thinks the legislature will do this session, in a short session?
I am hearing that there's a possibility that they will make some movements there. A lot of it, I think, is going to depend on how much additional revenue that they have available. But it seems to be a high priority of the General Assembly, and hopefully they'll address it.
The governor's already put 3 items in his
That's
proposal.
right, he did put that in his budget,
Which is pretty
funding for
hefty,
that.
but
That's
when you
exactly
consider
right.
all the school systems.
That's right. So that's a good sign that they're both nudging in that direction. So. And of course, there are additional requests for other operational, maintenance, custodial, and technology materials.
Let me address that real quick, and there's always a need for more. You know, Dusty's over here, he does well with his staff, with what he has, but obviously, you know, I love to have our buildings painted more frequently. There's times I go by but we are still short of staff, and I'm always looking for ways that we can add to the maintenance side of it as well from operations. And obviously, we already talked earlier on about our shortfall a little bit in terms of where we're at with capital and operations, and definitely a need for that as well. So it goes hand in hand. So I understand that is one of our priorities.
One of the questions I've had for the last 4 years that we've done this budget process is to ask and wonder why we can't get a further breakdown. And I know you don't want to get down into the weeds on the budget, but this is a 10,000 foot level. And if we could reach a happy medium somewhere between those two, it would be very good for me to know number one, how many personnel we have in each department or in each school, and what it costs to run that school, and each department as well. But if I was able to see that, to visualize that, how many employees we have and what it costs to actually run a school, this would make much more sense to me.
Okay.
These are abstract numbers right now that we approve every year. And just looking at those alone, we spend a lot of money. This is only about a fifth of our overall budget that we get with all of the fund sources that we get. I'd like to know how much, we spend in the schools, because then we can make informed decisions. You're already making these. When we come to this board meeting, somebody has already sat down, and I'm getting ahead of you, but the $6.2 million cut that we ended up ultimately with a $59.3 million recommended budget. We never see any of that. We never have any input as board members into that process. We rely on staff to do that. But it would be helpful, I think, to the board if we could get that information and know what it is the request that we're asking for.
Correct.
Because we ultimately have to make these decisions. And I'm assuming that when we go to approve this budget, after we have a budget hearing, if we had informed input, we may say, no, we need to put the money somewhere else.
Right.
Or we may need to decrease it or increase the budget. That's within the purview of the board, as I would understand it. But without that information, without having the knowledge that superintendent and staff has to make this and come up with these decisions of where we're going to spend it, the board has little or no input other than this is the budget, and what you present us, we have to accept.
Bob, you said two things that I'm hearing, maybe I'm wrong. You were saying that you wanted to know how many people were on staff at each school and how much it costs for each school. So you're not talking just about the local current expense fund.
No, I'm talking about the entire thing. In total, it would be helpful.
But I think,
because in June, we're going to come back and we're going to approve a budget that includes everything.
right, but this, I think what you've done is you broke this down on this page.
Right.
So you probably could easily say how many local teachers we pay, how many local TAs. I think that would be easy to do.
Yeah, I could get, that information for you, so can address some of those issues.
But on the other side of it, I don't know. You're the
Well-
person. I'm concerned that we have a dynamic budget. I mean, it's ever changing. And when you talk about personnel, you can't really say that today you're going to have 100 teachers at Jacksonville High School, and then when school opens, we might have 150. I mean, so the figures are not going to always be accurate, so it may give us a little false picture.
You worry about, giving you projection numbers and then it changes, and then, somebody say, well, that's not the number you gave. Well, we have more kids show up here, less kids show up there, and you have to do that. So, there's always those type things, and then there's things about utilizing the different funding sources to the best benefit. So it may not particularly be in this category or that category, but if we look at it more of a global perspective of like total numbers that we have here and there, we could probably help you out with that to give you a better picture.
And I understand what Madam Chair is saying. I understand what you're saying. I understand it's a dynamic situation.
Yeah.
But we know within 200 or 300, 400 people of how many people we have in the district on an ongoing basis. And the budgeting process is not real numbers. This is simply money that we anticipate spending in the following fiscal year.
Right.
When we get our expenses in for the year after it's over,
Right.
that comes out in an audit report, and
Right.
we can see those numbers.
Right.
But we never get a breakdown, really,
Well,
of how much we're spending in schools.
I can give you some good news on the by school amount, okay? It's coming, not necessarily this year, but next year. When that year is concluded, we will have some by school numbers for you. We're actually working at the state level to try to put in place where there's some type consistency in reporting from district to district, so numbers are hopefully in the same neighborhood when you're doing comparisons around And there'll be a school-by-school, per pupil expenditure number, kind of like we get now on the district-wide basis. DPI will actually publish school-by-school numbers for us at the conclusion of next year. So we're heading there, but it's a matter of getting some consistency among districts and reporting methods and things like that.
Districts
So-
aside,
Yeah.
we only have one district to worry about.
Sure, sure.
So, from a board standpoint, it's beneficial to me, and I know that you have all of the numbers roll into you one way or the other. I'm confident that you and your staff could put something together that would have the relatively high number values. We know how much it is for utilities every school. We know how much it is for our local expense fund for support personnel. And we have a general idea how many teachers that we're going to, and what their salary rates are.
Right.
It would be easy for me if I had that information to compile a spreadsheet and do that. And I'm just stymied that we're not able to do that in the district here.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I know we've discussed this past several years. From what I understand, in our training with the School Board Association, they always have people to come in and present about school budget, and they've done it in different ways. And what's been told to us, that this budget that we're discussing is a program budget, not a departmental budget. It is a budget for the district, not for individual schools. I can see going from 23 pages to about 2,000 pages if you did, and I don't know if you have that kind of time or even the staff to do that. But the other thing that I'm concerned about, we have a process that's in place that's been utilized for a number of years that I think has worked very well. I don't want, as an individual board member, to get into that process of trying to micromanage what should be spent or sent to a school. I don't think a principal would appreciate being micromanaged. This is why we have an effective process from teacher, principal, to department head, and finally comes up to here, to us for us to review. This is a program budget, not individual schools. I can understand what you're saying, Mr. Williams, but you've been with us how long?
This is my 16th go round
So this format has been used,
since before I got here.
Madam, and since I've been on the board, Madam Chair,
That's right.
Mr. Stout, and you're,
I remember when we got the long sheets, and then it had, and Bob probably would have appreciated this because he's a numbers man, is that those sheets gave us so much information that you couldn't put your head around it. But it did show how many teachers, let's say, the reductions.
That was primarily
Right.
about requests
Right.
from various
Right.
functional areas, or the requests, where those came from.
And
But
today,
that's
you
kinda what-
base,
We basically summarize that
Right.
today as the, requests
That was a working
for
document.
additional instructional support positions or.
yeah, that was a
those-
working document.
So,
Is this the same format that most districts in North Carolina use?
I believe so. This is, I'm not aware of districts budgeting down to the school level. Particularly when you start looking at some of the issues there, like in the state fund, where it's really more about positions, and it doesn't matter whether it's a 30-year veteran or a brand-new teacher that hasn't worked before. You pay them where the state requires you to pay them on a state salary schedule. And so those numbers may be different in terms of salaries and benefits, but they each got that one position. So you have to be a little careful when you start comparing per student numbers on a school basis, because there's that effect that occurred basically just based on sorting of where people go, but then also like on utilities, it may be higher at one school because it's an older school that is more costly to operate than a newer school. But when that's worked into a per student number, it doesn't necessarily give us value in managing that overall utility budget. So I don't know if that helps.
Well, my point is, this budget is following the state
Oh, yes,
statutes?
that's right.
And most districts use this, okay.
But you can give the, like, the number of local paid teachers
Correct.
that we have, the number of teacher assistants that we
Sure.
have, that we pay, testing coordinators, those kind of things. Would that help you, Mr. Williams?
It would help me, it would not satisfy me.
But I would think before we move to such a major change, that will be a decision by this board, by all 7 members.
Yes.
Well, it's my understanding that the state is moving us in that direction.
Well, they're not going,
On the,
it's sort of like a chart.
per pupil expenditures.
It won't
for-
give you breakdown, it would just here, and you got this chart and whatever else, but like you
Jeff's
said.
on that
It's not
committee,
really-
so he probably knows.
It's not necessarily on the budgeting side, but on the reporting side. We'll have reporting on that, but I don't think anyone, you know,
That's fine.
Jeff, could I get you to go back one slide?
The operations, maintenance, custodial, and technology, our HVAC people, our electrical people, custodians, all that. I know you didn't have the money in this budget, I just wanted to try to keep our eye on. Every time we keep adding square feet, we're giving these guys more stuff to take care of, so we might,
oh, yeah, there are some.
That's what I was trying
yeah.
to
they're
explain
having to
earlier.
do- they're
And
having to
we're
do
doing
more
more with less
with
each
less.
and every year with square footage increasing. And the people we're sending out, because we do most of our work, we got a very talented staff that saves a lot of money. People think that, if you had to go out and pay for it now, it would have been a whole lot more. And sometimes we have to when it comes to certain jobs. That's why it would be better to have it in-house to hire somebody. We just want to make sure we have that revenue in our capital.
Dusty and his staff are to be commended for what, all that they do with the number of personnel that they have.
And they also, need additional money in terms of the supplies and materials to do repairs and that sort of thing. And so hopefully through what we're talking about capital outlay, in a moment, it may help somewhat alleviate a little bit of that, but, we can't afford to fund everything they need to do. We don't have a unlimited, funding source out there, unfortunately. All right, so the bottom line here is that due to revenue constraints, over 6.2 million was cut, and that's kind of a generous number. It's actually probably a lot more than that if you look into everything everyone wanted. And so we had to get down to the 59.3 million of revenues that are available. And that is the local current expense fund presentation, and if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer those now. If not, I will turn it over to Steve for capital outlay.
Before we go, we want to take a break, just a second. But is there a time after budgeting that you could come back to the board for a workshop that will provide us like some overview of those numbers, like the number of teachers we have, those kind of things, and maybe equate an estimated value for that? That will help Bob as well as us. And we could do it in a workshop and be able to have, it wouldn't be an action item, and we could have some good dialogue about it.
Can I make one suggestion on that too? I think it'd be better to do that in October or later, because when the federal money comes through, Title
That
I
would be
plays
fine.
into it. Because, we always pay teachers with Title I money as well. So if you're really looking for an allocation in terms of how we're paying our teachers and what we're paying with, that way it kind of sifts us out, it comes out in the wash, so to speak, in October, November, in terms of actually how we're paying people out of local, out of federal, and out of state.
Well, could we not then go back to last year's and we would have all that data together and we could use last year's figures?
Well, I don't know how much time it would take him to do that if he's got to do it again in October.
Okay, that's fine.
Let's take a break.
Break.
Y'all, was a good break. Jody, thank you for the fruit. Did you cut that up? I think she got your other muffin. Okay, Steve?
Okay, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman, members of the board. Going to talk about capital outlay now. I know Mr. Holloman had discussed about approximately $6.1 million in reductions that they had to address. Well, in the process, we were looking at our requests as well, and we had just a quick note. We had about $17 million in requests, and we had to bring them down to $5.3 million. So we were also looking at doing some severe reductions. Before I get started, though, what I'd like to do is give you some quick notes again. I think we do this every year, but it's always a good thing to remind everybody. It's almost like talking points and bullets when we go out into the community as well. But the average age of all of our facilities, right now we have about 39 facilities, is 41 years old. A lot of people are saying, well, at 41 years old, they need to be replacing their buildings. We're saying they're just getting warmed up. So just make sure everybody's aware of that. We also have 3.8 million square feet of heated square feet of building space. A quick way to remember that would be, instead of saying 3.8 million or 838,614, just say we have approximately 88 acres of heated square feet of building. And as Mr. Holland mentioned, in 2003 we had close to 3 million, and in 2014 we had about 3.6 million square feet of heated space. Now that we've done our construction with Dixon Middle School, and we're looking at the Skill Center and also the Richlands Elementary School, even though Dixon Middle School and Richlands Elementary School were replacements, it also allowed us to repurpose some of the buildings that we already had, and we increased the size of the schools that we had too. So we've actually seen an increase in our square footage over the last couple of years. We have about 1,500 acres of land to be maintained, and this current year we had, based on our insurance valuations, $681,109,575 worth of property. That's over $500 million worth of property that we're looking at, 2/3 of a billion. Our request this year for capital outlay is $5,357,673, which is just 0.79%, less than 1% of the current asset value that we have in place. So what do our capital outlay programs support? This is the list that we talk about every year. I mean, roofing, and I've got Dusty Oliver here, and I've got Dusty Rhodes here. Dusty Oliver for maintenance and Dusty Rhodes for safety and security. But when we talk about roofing, we probably had close to 30 plus roofing requests that we had to look at. Some of them are large requests. For example, Hunters Creek Elementary, replacing that whole roof is going to be about $375,000. And some of them are smaller requests. So when we're looking at roofing, is one of the things we looked at. HVAC, and when I say HVAC, I'm including all the heating and air conditioning and chillers in that process as well. Plumbing, furniture. We have to buy furniture on an annual basis as well. And a good way to think about this is if we have 26,000 students, and I'm just going to keep numbers round right now, I mean simple, okay? And we replace student desk and student chair once every 26 years, that's 1,000 student desks and chairs that we have to purchase. Approximately $100 for a student desk and chair combination, then you're talking about $100,000 just for furniture, just for student desks and chairs, not other furniture that's associated with it. So you see that there's a lot of costs associated with the capital outlay. Vehicles, the state provides buses, yellow buses for us, but we also have maintenance vehicles. We have activity buses. We have other vehicles that we have to maintain on an ongoing basis. We have to have a dump truck. It's part of our process. So these are things that we look at. Athletic fields, we always look at maintaining athletic fields and bleachers. ADA needs, it's mandated by law. We have to have ramps for our mobile classrooms. We have to have certain equipment, certain construction in our buildings just to meet ADA requirements. Maintenance lawn equipment, parking, road, and repair. We could probably spend over half of our capital outlay just on paving, because I mean you've seen some of our schools and stuff. We got potholes that we continually fix and stuff. And what's the best solution? To repave. What's the temporary solution? Well, we patch the potholes. And then we got alarm systems and security, which is always a concern for us that we look at. So if you put it in perspective, let's say you had a 41-year-old house, similar to our average age of our school buildings, that costed $100,000. At 0.79%, you'd have $790 a year to spend repairing your house. Now that's an increase from what we talked about last year when we only had $3 million. But $790 a year to support all major programs, which includes your roofing, your air conditioning, your furniture, your plumbing, your driveways, all these things, and your alarm systems, security systems, all these things that you're putting into place, that's not much money to maintain a house over a year's time frame. A house and the property associated with the house. I want to make sure I stress that because we're talking about vehicles too. So what we did was, as we do every year, okay, the process that we put together for the capital outlay is we get input from all the schools in all the major departments, including maintenance and safety and security, construction, and all the different departments that are required. And we look at all the requests, we put all the requests together, and we look at it, and we identified 361 requests that came to us this year. Of those 361 requests, we had about $17 million worth of capital outlay requests that were identified. Well, that's a lot of requests. We knew we were going to get $17 million. So the next thing we have to do is, well, how do we go about the process of reducing? How do we put this in the sausage grinder? This is what we called it this year. How do we put it in the sausage grinder and come out with something that's palatable? So we created cross-development teams, which include a subset of principals, directors, and operations staff, and we reviewed each proposal. Now, when we review our proposals, what we have to look at, a couple things that are very important to understand. We have to look at, first, is it mandated by law? And a good example of that is with K-3 class sizes, we now have a requirement for mobile classrooms that we didn't have, that weren't mandated by law in the past. And if, in your packet, what I did was I also included a sheet that shows, I don't have it in front of me right now, what we talked about in one of our previous board meetings, of all the mobile classrooms that we're going to need over the next 4 years. So if you look at it, you can see that next year we're talking about 15 mobile classrooms. Well, I'm serious. The following year, in fiscal year 2020, we're going to need 15 mobile classrooms. And in that process, what we're looking at is we have to fund them in this coming up fiscal year 19. So in that process, we have to buy mobile classrooms. That's mandated by law. Another thing that we'd be looking at is our ADA requirements. If you get mobile classrooms, you have to have ramps that are built to ADA requirements. So we have a lot of things that we have to put together in this process.
So with the addition of these mobile classrooms, we will be up to what, 220?
We'll be up to approximately 220.
So in 1994, we had about 200 mobile classrooms, and fast forward, we've added how many schools, how many more classrooms, and we're still there.
Yes, sir. And one of the things too, as we go through this conversation and discussion, in our mobile classrooms, we identified that we were going to repurpose 5 mobile classrooms that we already have in place, purchase 10 more mobile classrooms, but we also have mobile classrooms that were built back in 60s, 70s, and so we're actually going in and rebuilding those so they meet our functional requirements. So we've got not just purchasing and moving mobiles, we're also rebuilding some mobiles to make it better.
Steve, when you move an existing building to another site, do you have to update them to current code? Because codes are changing in January.
In some situations we do, not every situation. We can grandfather in some things, and tell me if I'm saying this correct, Dusty, but it just depends on the situation and what we're looking at. If we move a mobile classroom that over to another school that requires that the mobile classroom has a bathroom, then we have to put the bathroom in. And once we start doing that, then we have to meet additional code. The other thing we look at is safety and security of students and staff, and it's always been a big issue with our school system. I don't know if you remember, but we've been going through this process for 5 or 6 years now. I believe it was back in 2013 we began changing out all the door locks, so all the classrooms could be locked from the inside of the classroom instead of going outside the classroom to lock the door. So we spent over $500,000 just to make that happen. We've upgraded camera systems. One of the things that we're working on now that has been extremely successful in the prototypes, Dixon Middle School is an example of this, and Richlands Elementary School project will be another one, is that we're using electronic door locks for all the perimeter doors on a campus. And so that's one of the things we're looking at putting in place as well. It's important to note, when we talk about putting perimeter door locks on all the campuses, that's a great thing, it's a great selling point, but one of the things we also have to realize is back in the 70s and back in some older times, you had classrooms were actually going to the outside instead of hallways. And so it's hard to do a perimeter door lock on every single campus we have, because some of the classrooms are just going straight out to the outside. The other thing we look at is protection, preservation of existing property. We could spend all the money that we get this year with just fixing roofs and paving roads. But these are things that need to be done on an annual basis. If we can't do it this year because we have other needs and that are mandated by law, or we're concerned about safety and security, then we start doing some patching as well to keep things going as long as we can. And then the other thing we like to do is look at instructional need whenever we can. If there's some additional instructional need that would benefit the students, we want to make sure we address that as well. So the capital outlay budget team got together and we prioritized based on those 4 requirements. Okay, mandated by law, safety and security, preservation of property, and instructional need. Once we did that, we came back in and we reduced the cost down to $5,357,673. It was ugly, right? It's that sausage grinding process, but we made it happen because we knew it was important to do that. We also received $22,000 in tax reimbursement for this year. So when we talk about $5,335,673, add $22,000 to that. Okay. So when we look at the capital outlay budget, and you'll see a summary right here in the sheet in the packet with you. We'll bring it up again. What you'll see is what we did is, when we looked at the first $3 million, what did we focus on? Well, we focused on the roofing and renovation. Newbridge Middle needs a new roof system. I didn't put this in here, but Hunters Creek Elementary is a large roof system that's required as well. That's in the list. We looked at HVAC systems for Swansboro Elementary, Southwest High, and Sandridge Elementary. These are big ticket items that we're talking about. So for example, with just the roofing renovations that we're talking about, we're probably over $650,000 worth of detail just for those 3 schools that I mentioned. HVAC systems the same way.
On the roofs, I know you said Hunters Creek Middle. Does that have
Hunters Creek Elementary, I'm
okay,
sorry.
Does it have a metal roof? I can't remember.
It will have a metal roof. But those style of schools that were built back in the early 90s, they had that, some of the board members might remember this, they had the Loadmaster roof. Mm-hmm. Remember with the sheetrock substrate for the roofing? Well, in this process, we're going out and we're replacing that with making the metal roofs. And then transportation, they had asked for 6 activity buses. We reduced it down to 2. That's approximately $180,000 right there for activity buses. Site improvements, we're trying to stay on a 10-year cycle for painting the schools. So we're looking at approximately 4 schools painted every year. And so we've got that listed. We have an underground fuel tank over at Thompson that we'd like to remove before it starts leaking. Yes, sir.
Wasn't the underground fuel tank at Thompson on last year's?
It was Mr. Williams, but our tank at the bridge looks like we may have to make it in worse shape. So we're getting proposals now from some engineers, some geotech people.
Okay.
And in fact, we've sent those over to purchasing just to have her submittals, and I think we're going to have to do that one first. So since we only had funding for one, we were going to shift over there because it looks like it's starting to leak worse, so that's why we did. And they're not using it because they're on natural gas too.
And there's no way we can fill that one as opposed to remove it?
That's an option, and we may end up doing that, depends on what the monitoring wells show. We may have to remove it because if there's enough contaminated soil, we may have to remove the soil in addition to the tank. We have to get the tank out first.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Another thing that we talked about also is playground equipment. We have some playground equipment that's in poor shape, and we'd like to go ahead and get them upgraded and replaced and repaired. We also have gym bleachers at Richlands High School. These are old bleachers, and they're not ADA compliant, but they're grandfathered in right now. But because of the age of them and the safety of them, we'd like to go ahead and upgrade the bleachers at Richlands High School.
I think that'd be appreciated. My wife fell down on them. Had to take her to the hospital.
And then athletic field bleacher upgrades at Southwest High School and Southwest Middle School. We'd like to get some handrails on those outside bleachers. Now, if we look at the additional funding that we're asking for this year, what we'd like to do also is make sure people are aware that safety and security is a big issue for the school system. We talked about the installation of the automatic door lock systems for the perimeter rollers. This is something we'd like to put in all the schools, all the campuses, as applicable. And then security upgrades for, camera upgrades for 5 schools. Jacksonville High School intercom is on its last legs, and we'd like to go ahead and get that replaced. We believe that's a safety issue. That's a big ticket item because you have so many different buildings on the campus, and you have to bore through the ground to all these different buildings and stuff. So it's about a $160,000 project right there.
Is the conduit already in place to pull those lines?
Not yet. And then we have school signage for first responders. One of the things that me and Dusty Rhodes and local law enforcement were talking about is if they have to do a quick response to a school, while we have the SILOC system and it's worked out well for us to be able to work with our first responders, the other thing that would be nice is when they get there, sometimes they don't even know which building is which. And so we're actually looking at identifying the school buildings on the outside so the first responders can approach and they know exactly where they go. They can see it's a 600 hall or a 200 hall or an E building or something like that. So that's some of the things that we want to do with that as well. We talked about mobile classrooms. We talked about purchase 10 new mobiles, move 5 mobiles, and we want to repair and upfit some older mobiles that we have as well. So we have some money in there for that.
Steve, back to one slide, it was paving all sites.
Mm-hmm.
What is, all of our sites?
No, paving all sites is just it's a general fund that we use to do any kind of patching and paving that's needed. And we've also identified some paving projects that are in that as well, specific paving projects. So when you look at the summary, this is what you see for the 2019 capital outlay budget proposal. As mentioned before, it's $5,357,673. So at this time, if you have any questions, I'll be more willing to entertain them. And I think Dusty have a specific detail if you need to drill down more than I can handle.
What's the architect and engineering $100,000 that we have in the budget for?
The architect and engineering, $100,000 for it. This is where we use, a lot of our projects anymore require that we have architect or engineering seals. Okay, even if it's a smaller project that we're doing, if we're upgrading, for example, if we're moving mobile classrooms, well then we got to get permissions and seals, and so we use that fee for that purpose right there. If we're looking at any kind of project work that we do that requires architect approval or engineering seals, we use that, and that happens on a continuous basis.
So it's outside the capital improvement,
That's
outside the new capital.
It's outside the large-scale capital projects that we're looking at.
What about school buses, Steve? These are,
Activity buses, the state doesn't provide them for us?
The state doesn't provide activity buses. They do provide yellow school buses. The county's always purchased activity buses for us in the past. They're about $85,000, $90,000 a piece, depending on what you get on them. One of the things that we are looking at in the future, just as an FYI, is looking at, is it beneficial for us to start looking at some 14-passenger activity buses as well, instead of the larger 50, 65-passenger school buses. And the reason why I say that is because a 14-passenger school bus doesn't require a person to have a CDL to drive it, okay? And so some of these smaller trips, we want to have maybe a fleet of those that way you don't have to get a bus driver or have to get an athletic director who's got their CDL to do it. Somebody else can actually do the driving in that process. So we're looking at some of that too, see if we can, which way is the best way to optimize it.
We've got a few of those now, correct?
Yeah, we have a couple of them now.
Steve, under furniture,
That's outside of the new schools.
That's outside of new schools.
That money's in the construction stuff.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, new school constructions, I think, for example, Dixon Middle School, we paid about $550,000 to flesh out the full school.
All right. Any other questions for Steve on capital before we move on? All right, so next steps on the budget. We have a public hearing scheduled for May the 1st, followed up by the regular board meeting for the approval of the capital outlay and the local current expense fund budgets, which will be submitted to the county by the statutory deadline of May 15th. And then we'll come back at your board meeting on June the 5th for adoption of these as well as the other budgets of the board. And the new fiscal year begins July 1. And the process begins all over. And that is all that we have for the 2019 budget proposal.
Steve, just a matter of clarification for the board. We'll have a public hearing on the 1st, and then we're going to, I think Jody's going to prepare a little meal for us. Not that she will be cooking. And then we'll have our regular meeting. Would you be prepared at that time for us to, as we're eating, we could go into a closed session and have some land discussion?
It would be very tight. I might have one piece of property we're getting close to agreeing on, and the other one is still finishing up some tests. I don't think it would be possible for me to do that.
We could set that aside if we do have it ready.
Yeah.
We could do
Okay.
that, yeah. Let's plan on that if possible.
Is that pleasure of the board?
Sure.
I think we need to, I mean, if we've got other decisions to make about the building of the schools and the presentation and talking with our commissioners, we need to kind of know where we stand in that.
Yeah, we're doing some due diligence right now. We're doing some bore samplings. We're doing some wetland delineation and phase 1 environmental studies and stuff like that, and contract negotiations right now. So we're right in the middle of it. So we should be
Okay.
coming close to it within the month. We should be completed with
Okay.
it.
Anything else for the good of the cause? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
And a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, good meeting, y'all.